Chenjo Demba Timen Daveshi, Sendon Dawa Jama Sahazen, the Regala Seba Suma Jenyame Chenjama Sahaz, Mambotuji Jedemba Tumje Jengadama, Sonomi Denjazo, the Shinshama Sahaz, Taben de Jachaba, Gavania Sunday, Chida Denama Shoju was in your Jama Sahaz, Genetor, Lava Dama Rabdu, the Shingatama, Gedamania Sahaz, the Washington. Gavapuzo Soba Jaranga Sende, Tena Sanje Temba, Karmara Rima, Jumansa, Melon Lodan Jenda, when the Jewish and the Solon de Atom Jessa, when you go on to the Ginger, Nadan Nadan, Shiva Love to Siva Son and Joan
to the teacher, the blessed one,
the blessed one, the one from beyond,
completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and good conduct.
Sugata
no Lord, supreme guide of beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and humans, to you the completely and fully awakened one, the blessed one, the glorious conqueror, the subduer whom the Shakya clan, I prostrate and make offerings and go for refuge. To the teacher, the blessed one, the one gone beyond, the full destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and good conduct. Sugata, no other word, supreme guide of beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and humans, to you the completely and fully awakened one, the blessed one, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate and make offerings and go for refuge. To the teacher, the blessed one, the one gone beyond, the full destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct. Sugata, no other word, supreme guide of beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and humans, to you the completely and fully awakened one, the blessed one, the glorious conqueror, the subduer upon the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings and go for refuge. When the supreme among humans you are born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides and said, I am supreme in this world, to you who are wise then I prostrate. With the pure body is formed supremely pure, wisdom ocean like golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, we know the best, to you I prostrate. With the spring signs face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. You are immaculate, the 3 worlds are not, incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the teacher having all understanding, the field of life with the qualities like a vast ocean, to you the one gone to dustness I prostrate. The purity which makes one free from attachment, the virtue which frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to that Dharma which pacifies I prostrate. Those who are liberated and also sure the path to liberation, all field qualified with realization, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you the sublime community, tending virtue I prostrate. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, mirage, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or bubble, a dream or flash of lightning in a cloud. See conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain rank of all seeing, subdue the 4 forms, and be delivered from motion of suffering, of aging, sickness, and death.
Sanje Jono, Zonje Jono, no, Saju, Davinja Zonje, Sonanji, and Dolan Benja Sanje, Sanje Jono, Zonje Jono, Saju, Davinja Zonje, Sonanji, and Dolan Benja Sanje, Sanje Jono, Zonje Jono, Saju, Davinja Zonje, Sonanji, and Dolan Benja Sanje, Sanje Jono, Zonje Jono, Saju, Davinja Zonje, Sonanji, Dolan Benja Sanje,
I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the merit I create by practicing giving and the other perfections, may I quickly attain the state of Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and Sangha. Through the merit I create by practicing giving and the other perfections, may I quickly attain the state of Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and Sangha. Through the merit I create by practicing giving and the other perfections, may I quickly attain the state of Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings.
Kete pumba daya na jeda jiwa jeda kete pumba na meje pumba sinye mewa jeda ni yuwa ma jeda dagi yuwa kama dada dagi shiwe je nganzema nyenze meje nganzema nyenze mewa teya yuwa ma jeda nganzema nyenze mewa kamba tonga me tonga dada shiro nye tonga dada dagi nyenze nyewa me baka jo je te zebe na jiwa ze leda nyumo sebe tara leda nyumo nambo teta jole joba na toma nye janga bo jo dawa shi jata jo je dame je je te bo sanje nam je dada na dame kame je je te jobra chawa to 심지 주연도에서 마제바다 뭐 춘년년에 대해서 좀 탐제 양다양다 뭐 인이 양다 매미 양다 매는 산제제되고 셴네셴네 시바도 저반도 좀 너도 메다다데 메데네 되네 가나데나 간주바 되네 제되니 되네 셴바하고 해제 제제메도 산제제되고 넘제 때마도 진교도 되지만 다데메 제바만이 또 로산제나마 조제니도 넘제세가 라산제지 신데 때마미나 다른 주요하다고 제주바라도 주바 조제하고 관계해야 되는 거 가지고 가방에 가지고 제방에 담고 다들 되면 되지만 주변 이제 시도 뭐 속에서 이제 뭐 다바다나 차세로 So I'm going to read from the beginning, 60 stanzas. In Sanskrit, Yukti Shashtika. Yukti is the reasoning, Shashti is the 60. Shashtika. Yukti Shashtika Vartika. So Vartika is commentary, right? So 60, reason 60 commentary. Acharya Chandrakirti's, in Sanskrit, Yukti Shastika, Vartika. Here is the word Varti. And then the reverent to the wisdom hero, the Manjushri. So this was just added by the Tibetan translator to follow the king's order to make sure the text is belong to the wisdom kind of section or something. So in the commentary, bowing to the author of these Reason 60s, which dispel the two extreme following the victorious path of the reasoning, I will, elucidate it with middle way or center way, middle way. So we have another translation, the Thupten Jinpa translation for the root text. Let me read this. So in this manner, the master Nagarjunas gained distinctive joy by seeing the reality of the relativities exactly as it is. So knowing that realization to be the source of supreme faith. So the understanding the dependent originations is the kind of the pathway to see or to convince the possibility of the Dharma, which is referring to the cessation of afflictive emotions. And that way you can confirm that there is actually a Buddha. So Buddha Dharma Sangha is proven through convictions based on this realization of the dependent origination. So therefore, saying that Nagarjuna says, gain distinctive joy by seeing the reality of the relativities exactly as it is, by knowing that he gained unique faith or pure faith. So pure faith in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So he kind of convinced that, yes, I can see the possibility of, Dharma. By that, I also see the possibility of the Buddha. So, supreme faiths, and also that whole store of the mundanes and the transcendent virtues, all noble individuals without exceptions. So not only that realization of dependent originations, not only the benefit you to attain enlightenment, even in the mundane or the super mundane, every good qualities flourish, increases through this wisdom realizing emptiness. So noble individuals who are exceptions, without exceptions, and even the perfect enlightenment about all aspects of the realities, which is unobscured intuitions of the victorious Buddha, all arises from seeing the relativities. So now kind of saying that this Nagarjuna's, Chandrakirti's commentary on Nagarjuna's root text, Reason 60, so Chandrakirti is saying that even the mundane good qualities, all the good qualities, the strengthen, increases by, realization of the dependent originations, even in the mundane, so the happiness, not only in the enlightenment of the nirvana, happiness also possible, within this mundane life, when you have this visual realizing emptiness.
The first homage stanza is homage to Nagarjuna, not to the Buddha.
Yeah, this, in the commentary is homage to Nagarjuna, because the author of this text. Sorry. And Nagarjuna's homage to the Buddha. So his father and father homage to his grandfather. So like that. So Chandrakirti says, I'm bowing to the author of the Reason 60. So Nagarjuna's. So now he was kind of saying that the benefit from this realization of different originations is, you gain supreme faith or the clear faith in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And not only that, benefiting the enlightenment, even in the mundane good qualities, all the noble good qualities, everything derived from or originate by the realization of divine origination. So this is why you kind of, so and then he was moved to explain the relativities. That kind of benefit, experience, that moved him to explain the relativities. He proclaims its, immunity from the taints of the extreme, notion of creation and destructions. I think he proclaimed the immunity from two extreme. One, the arising, and second, the destructions. So means there is no, true dependent originations, realization dependent originations, kind of keep him from falling in the true extremes. Intrinsic arising, intrinsically, disintegrations, which means intrinsically born, intrinsically die is for, I think Chandrakirti says, I'm so sure, so convinced there is no intrinsic birth and intrinsic death. So he proclaimed that immunity from the tense of the extreme notion of the creation and destructions, and being and nothing. And being and nothing means, and now I also kind of understand there is no intrinsic existence, and there is not a nothing, not annihilations. So being and nothing, nothingness. So being and nothingness. Being means here, I think, referring to the existence. What is existence? I understand there is no intrinsic existence. Anything that exists relatively exists. There's nothing by itself has ever existed. And because of negating the intrinsic existing, I also do not fall in annihilation. I do not deny the existing of the reality. So, because of its not being intrinsically produced, so nothing has intrinsically produced. So the magnificence of the relativities being its freedom from any intrinsic realities. So because of not being intrinsically produced, and nothing has ever intrinsically born, because nothing ever has produced intrinsically by the cause. So the magnificence of the relativities being its freedom. So that kind of understanding, deep convictions, that frees you from true extremes. Therefore, you're always kind of, it keeps you in a very positive and no fear, no attachment. So that kind of thing, yeah. Freedom means that. Feeling devotion for that transcend Lord who taught relativity. So feeling devotion for that, saying feeling devotion is more very kind of, unshakable, indestructible devotion towards the Buddha who taught the relativities. Himself having become indistinguishable from its actualities, Nagarjuna composed this homage to him. So Chandrakirti is saying that this realization emptiness, brings the great devotions towards the Buddha who taught the relativity, as Nagarjuna also, kind of finds the Buddha is something supreme and uncomparable, from this teaching of the relativities. Then this stanzas number 1 or number 0. So Nagarjuna's text, Reason 60, the first, I bow to the Lord. Maybe I'll just read from this Thupten translations. the actual, So in the through the German translation says, homage to the great sage who taught dependent originations, the means by which are eliminated arising and the destructions. So you can compare this translation, say, are bow to the lords of sages who proclaim the relativities, the way by which he abandoned the real creation and destructions. Yeah, the both are readable. So homage to the great sage who taught dependent originations, the means by which are eliminated, arising in the destructions. Kange jedan jiwa the tsuden in the ponyo, tenjin jiwa son, tuwanta na chansaro. Kange jedan jiwa the tsuden in the ponyo, tenjin jiwa son. So actually, kange jedan jiwa the tsuden in the ponyo. Kange jedan jiwa, one who, so one who shows the way to abandon or to abandon true extreme arising in the destructions. By teaching the dependent originations. So I bow to the great Tuantala sufferers.
Geshe?
Yeah?
Yeah, I get a little confused. I think it is the terminology. But when we say dependent arising, the term arising doesn't imply an origin, a beginning, arising.
Arising.
Doesn't imply an origin of the arising and an end of the arising. So it is what I don't understand. When you proclaim a dependent arising, it is that you have gone beyond origin and cessation. It is what I don't understand. Because when something arises dependently, it has a beginning of the arising. And it will have an end that end the arising. So you see, I think I have a confusion of terminology that what it is bothering me, it is the term arising, independent arising. I understand the interdependence, but the arising, it is what I have difficulty understanding.
So difficulty of saying the terminology they use arising in the destructions.
Yes, when something arises dependently, when we say arise,
dependently,
yes, but that means that it has a beginning and it has an end.
Not definitely, dependently. Definitely there is no arising. Dependently, relatively, yes, there is arising. Relatively, there is destruction.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Now I know. I understand. Yes. Yeah. I was putting the emphasis in arising, but not in dependent, and it is the opposite.
Dependence. So
yes.
Yeah. So when there's the Nagarjuna's text paying homage to the Buddha. So if I literally translate what exactly is the word in this the textbook, so here's Kangi Gyada Jivata Tsuli Yine Panjubas. Kangi Gyada Jivata, one who show the way to abandon three extremes, which is arising and the disintegrations, destructions. Right. Kange Gyada Jivata Tsuli Yine Panjubas. One who show the way to abandon, intrinsic arising and the intrinsic destructions, right? Sudden in the conjugas, by teaching what? Teaching dependent originations. By teaching dependent originations, that that the able one I bow. So if I read in Tibetan, like that. So which means, I'm paying homage to the able one because he showed the way to abandon two extremes. One is arising intrinsically. Second is disintegrating intrinsically.
And so he does that by teaching relativity.
Dependent originations.
Okay, good.
So first he says,
right.
He showed the way to abandon two extremes. So then the question is how he showed the path to abandon two extremes by teaching dependent originations. So therefore, I'm going to call him the able one. The able one. He's the only one. So this is what Kanye said. So I bow to the Lord's sages. In the terms to the Genesis, I mentioned homage to the great sages. To taught dependent originations in the means by which eliminate arising and the destructions. So when the Buddha is saying first dependent originations, and then that means by which are eliminate. So almost the same, right? He taught the dependent originations. By that, you can eliminate two extremes. So when I read in the Tibetan, the Tibetan letter says, one who show the way to abandon two extremes. In the intrinsic arising and the destructions intrinsically. By what? By teaching the dependent originations. So now, conclusions. Therefore, I'm going to call him the able one. You are the only one who able to taught this dependent originations. So the able one comes here. So so we call tuans. Sometimes the translation tupa is the able, the one, tuan means a chief of the able, or the principle of the able, or the able ones. So now here the purpose of this homage. Why did the master compose on homage, expressly for this middle way teaching, when he expressed no such praise to the voidness 70 or rebuttal of the objections. So now here the question is, this text has from the beginning, there's the homage to the Buddha, and the 70 stanzas and the rebuttal of the objections, two texts. From the beginning, there is no homage to the Buddha. And then the question is, why is that? So now he want to explain that. Chandrakirti is saying, the answer is that since the wordness 70 and the rebuttal of the objections are both elaborations on the fundamental verses of the middle way, root of the middle way. So they are not independent. The work is one of the continuations from the root of the middle way. One of the continuations is 70 stanzas and rebuttal the objections. Rebuttal of the objections. Both are part of root of the middle way. So therefore, the two texts from the beginning, there is no homage to the Buddha. So this 60 stanzas, reason 60, is different from these two texts. This is independent text. Independent text. This is similar to the root of the middle way. This is also analyzing the dependent origination. So this is what they're saying here. So thus the regard to the rebuttal objections from the verses of the fundamental verses of the middle way, there is no intrinsic reality in things such as cause and conditions. And where there is no intrinsic reality, there is no intrinsic reality either. So now saying that the rebuttal text, the rebuttal of the objections, we call the text, is part of the middle way, root of the middle way, because it is elaborating or kind of emphasizing more on this particular stanzas in the chapter 1. Chapter 1, so in chapter 1, there says the main kind of the chapter 1 is analyzing of the condition. Analyzing the condition, they're saying that one of the stanzas says, the nature of the effect, any nature of the effect or any nature of the result, never really, never previously pre-existing in the cause, individual cause or the collection of the cause. So the stanza number 1 in Nagarjuna is saying that the nature of effect never exists, never pre-exists within the kind of individual cause and condition or the collection of the cause and conditions. For example, the arising of the barley sprout. The barley sprout never exists, pre-existing in the barley seed and the assembly of the barley seed, which are water, soil, wind, the heat. So the nature of the kind of the barley sprout never pre-exists within the seed or each of the individual cause or the collection of the cause. Now this is the reason Nagarjuna says, this is why I say there is no intrinsic arising. There is no coming. Because it was not there. It was never exist there. How can it come from it? So therefore, no arising is, the understanding of the no arising is, it is not arise from, the existing of the seed or the assembly of the cause and condition. So this is why there's no arising, there is no self-arising, there is no sprout being other from their cause. Right? So there is no other means, when the sprout exists, seed is
seed has already ceased to exist. Whole assembly of the Bali seed and the cause and the condition, it all ceases to exist when the sprout is manifest, when the sprout is arisen. There is no measuring a seed, a sprout being different from or other from their cause. So there is no otherness, there is no self-arising, there is no arising from. So that particular kind of, the stanzas elaborated by another text called Rebuttal of the Objections. So Rebuttal of the Objection is part of that, elaborating on the stanzas number, analyzing, chapter 1, analyzing on the condition. So that's kind of saying that it is evident that rebuttal of the objections is an elaboration drawn from that middle way verses, since it treats objections and they respond to that verse. I think rebuttal of objections is finally by the analyzing and the objective analysis, and at the end conclusions, then says this is just debatants. This is just exist in the face of name and concept. Right? Arising is just exists in the face of name and thought. So the arising, the something arising, or something, something going to die or something died. Birth and the death. If something, there is such thing, exists, only way it can exist, before the name, before the thought. So another saying, if there is such thing as a meaning, birth and death, it's, how it exists, where it can be exists, who has accepted to be exist, and what condition, then says language and the thought. Language and the thought is the only subject that accepted the existing of the birth and the death. So now they're saying that implies, so death and the birth is, no way it can exist beyond the thought and the languages. So then, in consequential reasonings, saying if there is the birth and the death is existing beyond the language, beyond the thought, then, when we say something is going to happen, so going to happen, something is going to come. So then the question here is, if there is intrinsic meaning or intrinsic entity which is going to come, then what is that? We said effect is going to come. And come from where? Come from cause. So when you say, have you come from Japan? And we say, oh, I never been to there. I never lived there. I never, stayed there. I never been to Japan. How can I come from Japan? So then it says, effect has never existed within the cause, within the assembly of the cause, within the individual of the cause. How can effect coming from there to become? It must have exist there. So that kind of deflating the idea of intrinsic coming of the effect. So then second is intrinsic death is going to die, it's going to end. So, and you have to show, for example, if someone is going to die, that death is intrinsic. Then going to die in what time? So the what time it's going to die? What time is the death happened? So by definition, death means no more existing of that thing. So the no more existing of that thing, when it can happen, when did it happen? So then says the moment you stop breathing, moment your brain has ceased to function, right? And then we says that moment you have already born somewhere. How can you say you are, not existing by having been died? So there is no definition. Definitions of the death is no more existing. A loss of the identity, loss of the life, loss of the existing. If this is the definition, that definition has never found, never fit in the time of the death. So the meaning is not there. Definition is being, disapproved. So how can there be, the death and the birth is something exists beyond the name, language, beyond the thought. So if we just rely on the language, everything language has pointed is true, then we would say, I come from my past life. So then you must be existing in that past life. If, hypothetically, if you are, as a Geshela, is existing in the past life, in the past life may be the elephant. So at the elephant, there is Geshela and the elephant identity, both. So the two person. And then my next person also there, and another, the cat or something. So then there is the elephant and human being and the cat. So how can three person, could, exist, coexisting with one elephant body? So anything language has to point out, anything language has, shows the meaning, that meaning never exists intrinsically. That meaning is only accepted to be existing by the language. So you have to say that meaning is existing with relation to that language. Without relating to that language, there is no coming from the past life. There is no going to the next life. There is no death. There is no birth. So therefore, in a rebuttal of the objections, saying that, at the end, if you really want to know exactly the meaning of the birth and death, so the meaning of the birth and the death is not something, not something that exists, identified, in an independent unit. It is Anyway, so that's the kind of, rebuttal of the objections is an elaborations drawn from the center middle way verses, since it treats objections respond to that verses. Similarly, with regard to the voidness 70 from the verses in the middle way, so now 70 stanzas is a part of the middle way, and because 70 stanzas is kind of the elaborating on the meaning of, from the stanzas number 7, like illusions, like a dream, like a fairy city, such is birth, and such is life, and such is death, he proclaimed. So now saying, like a dream, like a city of the, city of the sand eater, in this way, like illusion in this way, there is someone born and remain and die. I don't know what happened. Christian cut out. Yeah, okay. Maybe he realized that emptiness. Shocked when realization emptiness. So it is evident, 70 stanzas is elaborations on this. Stanzas number 7, particularly the stanzas which is the birth and aging and death is only exists in a manner like illusions and dream and like a fairy city. So it is evident that voidness 70 is likewise an elaboration drawn from middle way verses, since it treats objection and respond to that verses. Since Nagarjuna composed this reasons 60, just like his middle way, primarily as investigations of relativities. It is not comparable to those texts that are elaborations of verses from within the middle way. So now this saying, reason 60 is not like, it is unlike 70 stanzas and rebuttal of objections. This is completely independent text, simply investigations of the relativities. So those who wish to travel to the city of Nirvana by abandoning all claim of reality, claim of realist. Yeah. Nagarjuna's, huh?
Does it mean saying as the essentialist or is it something different?
So Yeah, I think Tibetan reading and in English is different. So I think here, yeah, so this is independent. And those who wish to travel the city of Nirvana by abandoning all the claims of the realist. So this is, I think, one point number one, saying that one who wishes to travel the city of Nirvana by abandoning all the claims of, realistic, I think, all the misconceptions. What was the misconceptions? Yeah. And then thesis and other as to the creations and the destruction of the life through intrinsic realities. Others to the creation of the destruction of life through the intrinsic reality. Yeah. So this is also, sometimes it's really a little bit confusion by, the Chandrakirti way of writing, So Tibetan and Indian, the great masters, the way they read, the way they write, there's a different style. So the first is those who wish to travel to the city of Nirvana by abandoning all the realist claims of the realistic, means all the misconceptions, thesis and other to the creation and destruction of life through intrinsic realities. And some now say that this is everybody has the wish or aim, the desire to attain nirvana by abandoning all the afflictive emotions. Now, and that is the main point, and some beliefs in intrinsic property is with their kind of intellectual, they kind of find convinced there is intrinsic property. So, but still, they have a strong desire to attain the nirvana by abandoning all the afflictive emotions. And not only that, some of the non-Buddhists who believing in the Creator also have the wishes or desire to attain, nirvana. So now says, who believes in the Creator wish to attain nirvana, who believes in the intrinsic property also have the same desire to attain nirvana or moksha. And Nagarjunas and the Buddha Palitas, Chandrakirtis, they also, have supreme faith in the possibility of the nirvana. So now it says, so now who can attain nirvana among those people, and how it is possible to attain nirvana, how it is possible to in which way you can abandoning all the defilements which obscure to attain the nirvana. So Siddhanta school, Vabhashika school, Mind-only school, every effort, every meditations, every discipline for the nirvana. But their mind is, stuck almost very deep in intrinsic property. Something that, big ships, the anchors, touches the ground, and that stops the ship to move. So their mind is totally synced into the intrinsic property, but still they have a desire to attain nirvana. And not only those followers of the Buddha, and even those who believe in the Creator. So creators, worshiping devotion to the Lord Shiva, Krishna, Lakshmi, so many things, and the purpose of their devotion, the purpose of their faith in Creator is to attain nirvana. And some also believe in the nature, like the Charvaka school. There says everything is born from nature. And what are those natures? 4 elements. Everything born from 4 elements. Human being, animals, grass, fruits, all the plants. Born from, born from the 4 elements. So, and then there was some of the non-Buddhist school, and they also talk about the moksha and the liberations, but they also think the anger, the attachment is something that, the core of this, the anger and afflictive emotions are rooted into the nature of the element. So because of that, they also accept the Creator, the Bhagavan, is not free from anger and attachment. Right? You see many stories, the fiction stories they create, and sometimes the Creator is very angry to his creations. He come down and destroy his creations. And sometimes the creators, there's in the Hindu stories, Lord Shiva is very disappointed after his wife has died, and he cried, and years, he cried and he danced, and that creates, a lot of chaos in this earth. So I think all these people all have the desire to attain moksha. They think there's some kind of freedom. There's some kind of freedom from this cycling of samsara. But still, in their mind, believing that, anger and attachment is nature. It's by nature. It is because of the element. So, and then this natures and the spirit. Some still like in the Charvaka school, one of the Charvaka school, who not believing in next life and past life, but still they kind of wish for, successful, happier, and says, although there is no next life in the past life, but this life to be successful, to be powerful, you have to rely on, you have to kind of please those mountain gods, fire gods, the water gods. They believe in that, So something they wanted to be more successful, more powerful, But they all have this desire to find the happiness. The happiness, there is no limit for them. And the time, as a part of the non-Buddhist school, the Hindu, they also think time is one of the main factors that brings happiness and suffering. So they think that the time is also one of the creator, one of the Bhagavan, one of the God. And then the God, and among the God, there's some devotion to the Lord, Vishnu, some wish devotion to the Lord Shiva, some to the Brahma, some to the king of the god, so on, yet are handicapped by error through misconceiving the true realities, ultimate and superficial. So now it's saying that, within the Buddhist, school of thoughts, who very much believing in intrinsic property, and who believe in the creator, who believe in, the time of the elements, but all have the same desire to find the permanent state of happiness. They have the happiness they want. There is no limit. But still, they cannot find, they have no successfully found the actual path that lead to the liberation and enlightenment. So because their mind is misunderstood, misconceiving the true truth, which means, they do not understand the conventional and ultimate truth. So will not be able for a very long time to reach that city because of that, because of that not knowing the true truth, that binds them to not to achieve or not find the actual path to liberation for not just several years, thousand years. So now, and there's one of the texts in the Tantrayana said text. It says, "Chujugula chandam megayas." Chujugula chandam megayas. So, now this Prasangika school, Vivashika school, Sautrantika school, Mainoni school, even the Charvaka and non-Buddhists who believe in the creators, and all, have aimed, on nirvana. So nirvana has no compassion to all of them. Nirvana says, "Oh, you like me, so I I take you to my place." Chujugula chandamena. Nirvana has no compassion. Nirvana has no hatred towards this people who wish to attain. So nirvana is just neutral, as neutral state. So nirvanas, whose nature is the terminations of the cyclic life. So nirvana means end of cycle, end of birth. Nirvana is one of the meaning is nirvana, the end of cycling and birth, cycling in samsara, the end of birth. So another nirvana is the meaning is transcend from cyclic existence, or transcends from the mundanes. So that transcends means, Yangele Deva transcends from all the misconceptions, transcends from all the afflicted emotions, transcends from all the seed of the afflicted emotions. So the nature of the nirvana is the termination of the cyclic life. And since the mere fact of this teaching of the relativity itself serve as the cause of the undistorted insight into the true realities. So now, so the only key or the path, the gateway to reach that state of nirvana is realization of the relativities. Realization of the relativities. So they serve as the cause, serve as the cause of undistorted insight into the true realities. So it is prime and peerless journey all noble individuals have traveled. Now saying that this relativities, understanding relativity is, it is the kind of, it is the path that all the noble beings, arhats, the Buddha in the past, they traveled, and they travel from that path. Or in the future, the Buddha, the Bodhisattvas, and the arhats all travel from this path. So therefore, this is the cause for the nirvana. So now this means this realization of dependent origination is the cause of this, nirvana. So the universal path that is dedicated exclusively to the city of nirvana. So the universals, uni is the plural, and versal is many, right? The universal path. The universal path means, this is the path for, to attain nirvana. And this is the path for who believe in the creator, who believe in intrinsic property, who believe in time, who believe in, absence of intrinsic existence. This is the universal path. If any of those people who wish to attain the nirvana, you have to get through this path. The path is only one. So the freeing one completely from all creations. Consequently, the unexcelled teachers who taught it with consummate lordly power of the complete store of the intuition and the merit. So unexcelled teachers, and I think here he's used unexcelled teacher, the translations. Yeah, so consequently, the unexcelled teachers who taught it with the consummate, very skillfully, right? A lordly power of the complete store of the intuitions, so intuition, the wisdoms, the collection of the wisdom, and the collection of the merit. it is not celebrated by the power of the complete store of the person. Consummate intuition merit. It is not celebrated by Nagarjuna as Lord of Sage simply because he is chief among the disciple and hermit Buddha. So now saying that I think it's best in Tibetan text. It says this is why I call refer as the Buddha the able one, not because he is the able, because he is better than Arhat, the hearer Arhat and the solitary Arhat, or not because he is the teacher of the Bodhisattvas. Because now he's saying that because he taught the dependent originations, he taught the dependent originations by his own experience. So the one who first taught the dependent originations from his own realizations, from his own experience, the first one who taught. Therefore, he is the able one. So not because he is the able one, because he is higher, he is the higher than the other arhats. So he is the able one because he is the one, the first on this earth, taught the dependent originations from his own experience. The hermit Buddhas, rather than I recognize him as the Lord of the sages, because only the discoverer and taught the teaching of the relativities. Hence, the Nagarjuna said, I salute that Lord of the sage who proclaimed the relativities. Now, this guy, the translators, and constantly changing the words, terminologies. He thought he's writing a novel book. so here saying, from the beginning, the homage to the Buddha is referred to the able one, because the able one is not because he is better than arhats, not because he is better than the bodhisattvas, because he is the only one on this earth taught the dependent originations, from his own experience. That's why he is the able one. So it doesn't happen that someone who is not the Lord of not the able one, would proclaim the relativities, because proclaiming relativities makes one Lord of the sage, and so is it cause. So proclaiming, he is the able one because of the dependent origination, teaching of the first who taught the dependent originations. Therefore, the dependent origination is the cause. So it is the cause. Furthermore, becoming the able one is the cause of the proclaiming relativities. So now almost like, Chandrakirti is commenting on Nagarjuna saying, the Buddha and his teaching of the dependent originations is like a chicken and egg. But he is the cause. The dependent origination is the cause, the first cause, which can, lead you to the nirvana. So without dependent originations, you cannot attain nirvana. So, and therefore, the dependent origination, the realization of dependent origination is the first cause. And then the second is saying, the Buddha is the first one who taught dependent originations. So therefore, he is the cause of the teaching of the dependent originations. Right. So it's almost like, the egg is the first. Without egg, there is no chicken. And then says, chicken is the first who lays the egg. So, So Chandrakirti, the kind of the way commenting on Nagarjuna's text is, he kind of say, he just, way he says like that. So then says, is its cause, furthermore, becoming the Lord, the able one, is the proclaiming the relativities, since no one else has the ability to explain it. So he is the first one. Even the disciplines, the hermit Buddhas, enlightened, the altruist Bodhisattvas, are able to explain it only because of the teaching by the able one, Buddha. Because of the Buddha, now the Arhat, and they have attained the nirvana, they can teach the dependent originations. Bodhisattvas, they have, gone through many stages of the path and finally attained the nirvana, enlightenment. They are able to teach the dependent originations. So all of them, they are taught by the Buddha. If one object that neither Lord nor his teaching is the truly established, and so now they say argument, say, now you are saying dependent origination is the first cause that allows all the Bodhisattvas possible. Therefore, dependent origination is the first cause. And then you are saying that dependent origination is first taught by the Buddha. Now, are you saying Buddha is the first or the dependent origination is first? If none of those has truly established, since they are mutually dependent, we reply as follows. Which is mutually dependent is neither created nor destroyed with any other intrinsic reality. So something they can dispute on that Chandrakirti's kind of statement. So you are saying the dependent origination is the first, and then you're now just dependent originations. Before that, there's the Buddha, the able one. And if both are mutually depending, you could not establish which one comes first, which means they both are not true. And then Chandrakirti says, so, dependent originations is exactly like that. When there is the East, therefore there is the West. When there is the West, there is the East. I cannot establish the first East was kind of East exist, and after that West exists. I don't see there's the order, the East and West. I don't see there's the order of the short and tall. I don't see there's the order of high and low. But mutually it exists. Intrinsic realities is relativity. This is precisely what voidness, advocate, right? The voidness advocates claim. For one does not become the Lord of the sage, the able one, simply by proclaiming the relativity, but rather by articulating the patterns of the mutually dependent establishment of the things that hence by negating things, intrinsic reality, the creation and the destructions. So that is the exact meanings. There's mutually depending, therefore, both are exist mutually, dependently. If one is not exist, other cannot be exist. If the dependent origination is not there, and there is no one who has attained the nirvana, through realization of the dependent originations. If there is no teaching if there is no Buddha who can taught this dependent originations through his own experience, there is no teaching of the dependent originations. So you understand that, right? Other intrinsic realities and relativities, precisely the voidness advocates proclaim, advocates claim. Tombe Rashi, for one does not become the Lord of the sage simply by proclaiming the relativities. So now this is, so dependent originations is the first cause that can let all noble beings to attain nirvana. For one does not become the Lord simply proclaiming. So just, accepting or kind of just, simply understanding, from the word and the how's that? Ideally understanding with the dependent originations or claiming with the dependent originations is not necessary the individual have understood the very settled meaning of the dependent originations. For example, mind-only school, Swadhyaya school, they all, claim that everything dependent originations, dependent risings. So at the same time, their mind is very much, believe, right? Kind of, the mind is mired into intrinsic property. So they still claim the dependent originations. It is not the exact understanding of dependent origination by the Prasangika school has proclaimed, but they also say the dependent originations. So just simply advocate the wordness claim. So like simply, Swadhyaya school also says emptiness of the person or self. So their understanding emptiness is not exactly the emptiness which is explains in the Prasangika school, and mind-only school also says emptiness. Right. So usually I think last Sunday I said, when we talk about emptiness of what? What has emptied? So in the mind-only school, emptiness is emptiness is something they kind of establish from two things combined. Intrinsic or truly existing of the consciousness, and being absence of external reality. The emptiness of the consciousness is consciousness being empty of external reality. So you have only emptied external reality, but you're still, grasping on the consciousness is something intrinsic and truly exists. So that emptiness is like the empty table. It is not totally, empty. It's just empty of something. The table being empty of cup and plate. And Siddhartha school and Vaibhashika school, emptiness of the I, emptiness of the person is, the aggregates are truly exist. The empty of permanent I, emptiness, empty of, independent, self-sufficient I. So by emptying something, there are some kind of affirmative suggestions, So just verbally claiming the dependent origination is not enough to prove that you have understood the very subtle meaning of dependent originations. So Buddha is not simply, claiming the relativities he attained in nirvana. So, but rather by articulating the patterns of the mutually dependent origin, dependent establishment of the things, and hence by negating things' intrinsic realities. So here the dependent origination is, dependent originations, understood dependent originations through emptying the intrinsic property. When you empty the intrinsic property, you only thing that you can hold on, only thing that you can suggest is that relativities. Right. When you empty the intrinsic birth arising, after having emptied intrinsic arising, what arises that you can understand? In what subject? And then says, relatively, we can accept there is arising. The arising is not intrinsic. Relatively, yes, arising. Right. So this is what the saying that it is not like something that you have found truly existing, and then when it compare with something else, then say, oh, it is empty of that. Mind-only school, they find the consciousness is intrinsic and it is truly exist. When the consciousness with external reality, so consciousness is empty of external reality. So, the sound of independent originations is not going to prove that you have understood. So now, what kind of dependent originations that you have accepting? Saying that we accept the dependent originations is, the mere relatively. So dependent originations, so dependent is not like flower depending on the pot. So the bird sitting on the branches, it's not, there is two solid things, two substance things. The Prasangika school, dependent is east and west. How west, existing of west is depending on east. So east is not the cause of the west. West is not, kind of not coming from the east. West is not in the east, but because of the, because of the existing construct of the east, that allows the west to be existing. This much the dependent originations. It is not like the person depending on his house, or depending on his car, depending on his chair, right? So it's not substantially dependent. It is relatively dependent in east and west, short and tall, good and bad. So normally when we, and so minority school and Sutanic school dependence, the bird depending on the branches of the tree that he can, stand. So without, flying, he can sit on the branch. So, Prasangika school says that is dependent, but the dependent origination that we are talking about, dependent origination that which can lead you to liberation is not that one. So dependent originations is relatively, means now the dependent originations, what makes it existing is if you are asked, what is the condition that makes dependent originations existing? Then it says thought and name. Thought and the languages. So thought and the language is the two conditions that construct the existence or the dependent originations. So if you're trying to find the way, if you're trying to find where the dependent origination exists, then I would say it exists in your language, it exists in your thought. So that is kind of, this much it has, the tiny way of existing of the dependent originations. Without relating to the languages and the thought, there is no such thing could exist. Without relation to the thought and the language, there's nothing exists. No such arising exists, no such death exists, no such aging exists, there's no suffering exists. Right. Only with relation to that. Sometimes we say, where is that with one single braid, and with one single braid that from the one single braid, the separations of its color and sound and smell and taste and textures, how could it be possible? How can that exist from one single braid? The separation of, color, smell, taste, textures, and then we say there's only one reason it can exist is with relation to the eye, with relation to the nose, with relation to the tongue, with relation to tactilities. Yes, there is the separation of color, smell, taste, texture of one single bread. So that, in the Prasangika school, this is called dependent originations. It's not dependent, you put something on the table and the cup is depending on the table. It's not like that, So, so sometimes we use so far the Tibetan translators in the old time, they use, that is called Genyin Dibazams, means Genyi Dibazams. So actually, they could not really find the actual, word that could describe. And it's just make a sound. Genyin Dibazam means the mere something say this is. So which means mere something says this is the only reason that could exist. Which means mere from the languages and mental construct. And something is, you can say, there is something, this is something, this is good or this is bad, So this happened, therefore this happened. So some kind of verbal, could, indicate, indicate. So what has indicated is still remain existing with indicator. So the Prasangika school main point is, Prasangika school, dependent originations is several dependent originations. Is relativity. Relativity is conceptually, linguistically, only that way, on this relations, something you can claim exists, something you can say, unmistakenly, yes, this has exist. If you go beyond that, nothing you can prove. You cannot prove the continuity. You cannot prove cause-effect relations. You cannot prove something is coming. You cannot prove this is going to produce that. These are all nonsense without relating to the language and the mental construct. Right. So again in Tibetan's, just mere, the word of this is and that is. So this kind of understanding of the dependent origination in several ways, and then your mind can be free from two extreme, intrinsic arising, intrinsic distractions. There's no intrinsic birth, there's no intrinsic aging, there's no intrinsic death. So when the mind began to free from this, true extreme, and mind, by nature, it experiences, kind of peace, because there is no space for fear, there's no space for, obsessions of the, fixations. So mind being, begin to free from that, the fear and obsessions is some kind of, reliable, sustainable peace in the mind. So continue. Yeah.
And there is not intrinsic dependent origination.
Huh?
And there is not intrinsic dependent origination.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. There is no intrinsic dependent originations. So dependent originations in the Prasangika school, there's a dependent originations understood in the relativities. In the relativity means, yes, there is the meaning of short and tall. There is no meaning of east and west, south and north. And that meanings only exist relatively, so it is, you cannot say it's there, it is there. So you can say, because of that, this happened. Because of this, that happened. So there is no intrinsic, therefore, you cannot find this East and West has any order. Right. So anything that you can say the East is the cause of the West, West is the cause of the East. West has not produced East, East has not produced the West. But because of the East, idea of the East, that makes the existing, that allows the existing of the idea of the West. Idea of the tall, the idea of the short exists. Idea of the short, the tall exists. So if someone argued that, what if there's the place that everybody has, same kind of the body height? Everyone just exactly the same height. 100,000 people live together. Then he says, is there any short or tall? There is no tall. No one says, I'm tall. So the idea of the tall is because it has to compare with something shorter than that thing. So if we don't have this physical body, this is the, the derivative, inner derivative elements is no longer with our consciousness. Can consciousness find, see the distance, far and near? No. If we don't have this body, consciousness do not see, the idea of the far and near. So with this, depending on with this body, we can say this is very far, this is very, near. Near and short is relatively exists. So near and short is not we have found on the ground. Near and short is not on the ground. Near and short for you with your body, your physical. One physical, compare with another physical, and then you can say short and tall, near and far. Yeah, I think this pretty much, the CC, even the existing of the speed. So the existing of the speed of your car is also relatively exists, if not relatively exists, because the car is in the very speed, therefore speed is in the car. And then you have hard time, looking at this side, you cannot have, any, muscular flying in your car. Because the speed of the car can, stop the flying the muscular wearing the eyeglasses. So this means speed is not in there. Speed is not on the road. Relatively, yes, there is a speed. So everything is, then Prasanga school thinks that, yeah. So many times I fly in the Singapore airline, and the airplane shows the speed is 9,000 something like 909 something like speed on the ground. So if that kind of speed in the airplane, I may not be able to walk in the airplane. I cannot go to the toilet and come back. I cannot knock the door of the pilot. So the speeds are relatively existing. Now, I think this is very, very, it's powerful, the idea of the dependent originations, the Nagarjuna says. Everything is relatively exists. There is nothing you can pinpoint. It's there and there. It just happened. It exists. You experience relatively. You construct relatively. Relatively experiencing, relatively fabricating is the only, way to see things that exist.
Then Geshe, what is behind the words, behind the explanations? Besides, is there anything beyond language?
Beyond the language.
Yeah.
Is there anything beyond the language? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beyond the language and thought. Language has muted, thought has stopped functioning when the mind experiences the emptiness. You have nothing to say. You cannot, linguistically, describe what you have seen, what you experience. No, you can talk, can imagine, construct. So when the mind, start abiding in emptiness, the thought process activities are stopped because it cannot reach there. The language cannot express. Language is muted, thought has stopped. So when that kind of state, the mind can reach, mind can, land it or abide in some kind of meaning that you have directly experienced. And so if this meaning, understanding can stop the thought and the language, which means it has the power to overcome, to eliminate all the misconceptions that is grasping on the mental construct. Because our delusions are all rise and active projection. So you have gone beyond that thought, where there is thought cannot reach there. So which means automatically, from the time being, you are free from all the afflictive emotion at the time.
Yeah.
Right? So when you come out of meditation, and again you go back with your habit, and you start constructing, and then there is some kind of, you see, now you are more aware of how the delusions are arising. Before you don't see, it just comes, and once it comes, you're overpowered by that emotion. Now you have seen that, you have kind of temporarily visit that city of nirvana. So because of that, now you are very aware how the emotions is generated, how it remains, and what condition is sustaining that emotion.
You become the master of your own illusions.
Yeah. So I think this is kind of very, very fortunate. You can even intellectually, you can imagine, conceive the possibility of the nirvana is there. So the moment you have, which means you have right now planted the seed for the liberations. So when you plant the seed, you have to water many times. So you have to think again and again. So, yeah. True, yeah. So if there is any kind of intellectual understanding, you kind of sense that possibility of nirvana. And then to sustain, to continue the practice, not only this life and next life and next life. Now you have to be, you have to be, how's that? What do you call it? Very, thoughtful to continuum of the practice of this dependent originations, because it has to go through many lives. Lives means, need food, clothing, medicine, houses, friends, So then you have to find all the cause and condition to provide, good time for continuous practice that dependent originations. So therefore, practicing moral ethic, generosity, patience, concentration, mindfulness are very, very important. Yeah. Chanju semja rinpoche, ma jeba na jeju jeba nyamba meba nyo, kone kondo peba. Tonye dawa rinpoche, ma jeba na jeju jeba nyamba meba. Kone kondo peba, pama semja tamje, dada tenju. Ngendro tamje dado tongwa, chanju semja kanda sushu. Teda kunje monam jubje ruji, kare rabu kubi chima. Penda dewa manun jubi, jere sama tenzi jani. Shabe side badu tenju ruji.
May the precious body mind not yet born arise. May the born of no decline but increase forevermore. May the precious mind realizing emptiness not yet born arising grow. May the born of no decline but increase forevermore. Due to all these merits, may all father and mother sentient beings have all the happiness, and may all lower realms be empty forever. Wherever there are bodhisattvas, may all their prayers be accomplished immediately. In the sacred land surrounded by snow mountains, you are the source of all benefit and happiness. O powerful Trinity cleansing Gyatso, remain in this world until samsara ends.
Thank you very much.